Welcome to Jon Ferrian Live. It is back at the normal place. I'm back home, guys. The epic national adventure Live Large tour of the United States is over. I've been back home for a month, and things are getting a little bit back to normal routine. Back in the living room, I got the fireplace behind me. I've got my guests on tonight. They're coming on here. We're going to have a good time. So be sure as you come on and you start watching, let us know where you're watching from. We love knowing where everybody's watching from. And again, don't forget, tonight's the Live Large episode with Steve and Scott from Wisconsin. We're going to get and chatting with them a little bit tonight. Steve and Scott found themselves in the backwoods of Wisconsin, in a remote area, and we're in an accident. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight and what went right, what went wrong. But for the few folks who maybe haven't seen Jon Ferrian live yet, and maybe this is your first time, here's what we're about. We come on almost every Sunday night. Sometimes we adjust schedule based on needing to accommodate my schedule or somebody else's schedule. But typically we're here Sunday nights, 7 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Central time, whatever your time zone math is, that's when we're on, about that time every Sunday night. And we're here talking about backcountry safety, avalanche education, trail safety, anything going on in the snowmobile industry that's safety, education, or just general positive growth of the sport. Sometimes we'll have pro riders on. Sometimes, like tonight, we'll have folks that maybe you've never heard of before, but they've got really powerful stories, and they're here to, give us some tips on what went right, what went wrong, and what's going on. A little bit about myself, if you don't know. Jon Ferrian. I'm originally from Minnesota, the Brainerd Lakes area. Grew up there, started snowmobiling as a kid. Moved to the East Coast for a little while, lived in New Hampshire, and spent a year or 2 years out there snowmobiling. Came back to Minnesota for another 10 or so years from 2000 to 2010. Got, at that point, involved into clubs, got really deep dive into clubs. Moved then to Washington State in 2012, where I found myself getting involved in the Northwest Avalanche Center up here, the local Avalanche Center, which I've just recently been added as the vice president of the Avalanche Center up here in the Northwest, and also the Washington State Snowmobile Association. I ended up being the safety coordinator for the State Association here in Washington, and all around just general safety guy, but mostly passionate snowmobiler, passionate about the sport. Love being out here with you guys every night, and I found this niche in the industry with this podcast, and we have a lot of fun with it. And this last 3 weeks before this week, we had a vacation. We were traveling the country, and we got to meet a lot of folks across the country. It was a great time. But again, thanks for you guys for dropping in. Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to share. Tonight, for sharing, we've got another Woody's prize. So Woody's is putting up another T-shirt. So Woody's Racing T-shirts. By the way, these T-shirts they make, guys, are pretty comfortable. I've got 3 or 4 of their Woody's T-shirts. Some of my favorite shirts. They're always super comfy. They're looking good. They got sleds on them. Get out there, share the show, let everybody know what's going on with safety and education. So let me kill the music, and then I'll drop the screen here. So Steve and Scott, if you're ready, I'll drop this in 3, 2, and 1. There you go. How's it going, gentlemen?
Good. How you doing, John?
Good. You guys are like movie stars. Welcome to the Live Large family.
Glad to be here.
Awesome, yes. Awesome. So let's just tee this up right away. The way you guys and I met were through some mutual friend of ours. And Scott, you just happen to be wearing the shirt tonight. Great placement of the logo. Our friends over at Altitude Sickness, both Jason as well as Rick, they've been on the show before, and they introduced us. So I'm glad to have you guys on and to make your acquaintance. It's been a fantastic time getting to know you guys through the last week as we've been on some phone calls. So welcome to Jon Ferrian Live.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Well, let's get to know you guys a little bit first. And so we'll kind of do it in the order that kind of us across the screen. And just as a reminder for the guys on the show here, they don't know this, but Scott's my first guy on the left. I've got Steve in the middle, and then I'm over on the right side of the screen. And so, Scott, why don't you just give us a quick rundown of, just a few minutes worth of, who you are, kind of where you grew up, how you got into riding, what your day job is. Let us get to know who you are as Scott, the human being.
Absolutely, sure. So as far as snowmobiling goes, I've been snowmobiling all my life. I mean, it was my family started in snowmobiling, and I've been riding on, 1970 Evernudes from day one. Continued snowmobiling throughout my college years, and got into, a lot of trail riding in northern Wisconsin. Got involved with the clubs up there, doing some grooming, things like that, doing trail brushing, do a lot of volunteer that work that way. And then I think it was about 96 was my first trip out west, and Fell in love with riding out in the mountains and continue to still go out there quite a bit. Still continue to do a lot of trail riding, so it's kind of hard to mix both of them, and it's quite a passion. But
Yeah.
then I got involved with Pink Ribbon Riders, Jody.
Yep.
She asked me to do some leading and some guiding for her group up in northern Wisconsin out of Eagle River. I did that for 7 years. And then fortunate enough, I went out with her group out to Togety and did some riding with them and got to meet a lot of people like Lefty and, Skinner Bell, all those guys. So I've really enjoyed my life of snowmobiling. So, however, I can't do it full time because actually I do have to have a job to pay for all this. So
Gotta have a day job. Gotta have a day job.
So yeah, I'm currently with the City of Greenfield Police Department, just a suburb of Milwaukee.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool.
Winters.
Which rumor has it that's where you met your buddy Steve here, right?
It is. Yes, he started a short time after I did, and obviously found out his passion of snowmobiling too, and got him into it, and been snowmobiling ever since.
Awesome, awesome. So Steve, it's your turn. Anything else, Scott, that we missed you want to catch quick before I jump to Steve?
That's pretty much everything in a nutshell.
Thanks for the intro. So these guys are, just like Rick and Jason was, these are two good buddies that are very competitive, and they like to give each other a little bit of a hard time. So if every once in a while there's a jab thrown back and forth between the screens, you guys will understand, right?
Right. They're firefighters. That's how it goes.
Exactly. So, Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself, and for everybody's benefit, I know a big part of the show topic tonight is, you're missing a wing, right? And in the screenshot right now, we're missing. Yeah, we
get it. But
there you go. So, yeah, right now it's basically just tight of your shoulder to shoulder. We got a nice narrow view of you, but yeah, let everybody see that you showed them. But yeah, big topic of tonight is how you lost your arm in that snowmobile accident and what that's about. And let's tie in your intro here a little bit about how the accident has impacted your career a little bit. We'll kind of tee that up at the beginning here, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about the accident. But let us get to know you a little bit first, Steve. Go for it.
Sounds good. I also grew up in Minnesota, Rosemont.
Minnesota.
Right.
My old home state.
Yeah. Southern suburb of the Twin Cities metro area. So I started young snowmobiling too. I would think probably 6th grade, 7th grade. My dad bought the first snowmobile, and it's just been progressing from there. I think it was like a 86 Arctic Cat Jag. So I've always been an Arctic Cat guy because that's what I started.
Sorry about that.
I know, right? It's my dad's fault. No.
I know, right?
So, but yeah, so I kind of grew up that way. I graduated high school, went to college at Winona State University, which is also in Minnesota. When I graduated there in 2003, I actually a couple of years while I was there, I actually sold my snowmobile just because of money and everything else like that. So there was a period where I wasn't snowmobiling at all.
So everybody has that dark time in their life where they didn't snowmobile for a period of time. So we understand, and our condolences. So.
Right, it was a sad time, I tell you. But then so I got hired in City of Greenfield Police Department in 2005, and where I met Scott. And it was a few years later that he kind of got me back into it again. I went up with him up north, and I was hooked, and I bought a snowmobile from there. But so when I started in 2005, I was a patrol officer, and I was on the road till about I got the K-9 officer position in 2013. So I was a K-9 officer for 2 years. In 2015, February is when the accident actually happened.
Okay.
So the accident then, kind of put me in a position where I couldn't do the normal functions that I was doing before. After, the time I spent in the hospital and stuff like that, I ultimately retired from my position as a police officer in 2016. Mm-hmm. And then I transitioned into a IT role for the City of Greenfield. And actually, I was able to keep my office in the police department, so I still got to do all the technology for the police department. And then that transition to the last 3 years, I've been doing all our forensics investigations for phones and computers for all types of crimes that we seize the items, and then I forensically extract the information from those devices. So as hard as this accident has been on me, it's actually been pretty fortunate for how everything's worked out. And I'm really enjoying what I'm doing now. So it helps quite a bit.
Yeah, something that a lot of folks, both personally in my private conversations, as well as, I don't know if I've officially shared it on the show yet or not, but I'm a big advocate of the thought process of you can't control what happens to you, but you can always control how you respond, right? And I think, one thing that my goal with kind of you guys getting introduced and kind of talking through this a little bit on the front side here is you know what, you guys are, you could be my best buddy down the street, right? Like that's the part I want everybody to kind of understand is we all ride with friends, throughout the country, and all of our riding partners are no different than you guys here. We all have day jobs. And the part that we don't always consider as we go out and do snowmobiling or any other motorized recreation is, going out of our way to, take extra precautions and safety and all those things. Sometimes it feels like a burden on the front end, and I'm not even talking specifically about your issue here, Steve, but, just broadly, like if people take a little extra time to learn some things, to think through some things, the impact on our daily lives, we don't always consider, right? It's like, oh, we're going to go snowmobiling, and if something happens snowmobiling, oh, bummer, I wrecked my sled. No big deal, right? But we're not always considering the fact of like, man, what happens if I get hurt and I can't do my day job? What's going to happen next, right? And I shared with you guys on the phone call earlier this week is that I went through that myself at one point where I did a compression fracture in my back. I had a pretty significant snowball injury. In the moment, I'm like, oh my God, I thought maybe I was going to be paralyzed. I felt that tingling in my legs, and it was a compression fracture. And it's one of those moments in your life where you just start reflecting on, wow, like this can impact my job, it can impact my family, my ability to be an active father. All of those things are at play when we go out and play in the backcountry or on the trail systems, or frankly out in the lake on our personal watercrafts or whatever it is. And that's something I just want to resonate up front for the folks who are watching tonight is that a little preventative measure on the front side can go a long way sometimes to preventing heartache in all of our families and our lives and as we go forward. But we'll find out tonight as we go through this that that's not necessarily the case for you guys. I don't know that there was a whole lot that could have prevented your accident in this case. It kind of was just a freak accident. We'll go through that tonight in some level of detail. So,
All right.
Cool. Steve, anything else you want to share with everybody before we kind of dive into, we'll kind of reflect back on the day of the accident and what happened?
No, I think
okay.
everything I need.
Cool. So let me tell the audience here one more time. There's a lot of folks watching right now. We got a great live audience going. And if you haven't already, drop in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. This is a great example is tonight we have a story of a Wisconsin trail ride that went wrong. And everybody who watches my show regularly knows that a lot of times we're talking about avalanches or backcountry safety or Western snowmobiling. And so this is an example of when I know there's a ton of folks watching from the Midwest, we try to reach out to guests who are from the Midwest or that, the stories relate back to the areas that everybody's riding in, where they're from. So I love knowing where everybody's watching from. So drop that in the comments. And if you haven't already, messages and stories like tonight are powerful. They literally change people's lives sometimes. I get a lot of feedback after shows like this of people who kind of change things and whether it be what they carry, what they do, how they conduct themselves out in the backcountry or the trail systems based on these shows. And so get the message out, share it out to your personal page, share it out to, any other sled pages or club pages you might have. And just for doing that, you're going to get in to win a Woody's t-shirt tonight. So, all right. So I think we talked a little bit on the phone kind of up to this point of, how this started out. And, I think, Steve, we decided that you were going to kind of bring us through kind of what led up to that day and kind of, what led up to maybe that moment of the accident. And then right. Scott, you being kind of the person who had to respond to the accident and get involved with finding and getting a hold of the first responders and everybody to help Steve out. We'll have you cover the last part. But this is an open forum, and I want you guys both to kind of chime in as needed. But I'm going to turn it over to you first, Steve, and just kind of walk us through, the normal trail systems that you guys are riding are up in northern Wisconsin. Is this day any different than any other day? Just take us back and start walking us through the day in detail.
Right. Yeah, it just was a typical day for us. Every year, I don't even remember we started, but we started doing backpacking trips where we would leave Scott's cabin and we would go up to the UP, Upper Peninsula, and we would ride, 150, 200 miles a day and then stay somewhere up in the UP, make a 4-day trip of it and come back. And this is one of those trips. We got up in the morning. It was a beautiful morning, but it was cold, about 7 a.m. We get on the trail, probably 30 minutes into the ride, well, not even quite that. We had pulled over and stopped, and I was cold. That's the only thing I can remember that was different about this morning was it was a little bit colder. I switched gloves out, and then we proceeded down the trail. I don't know how much longer it was after that. You kind of get, there's been times you get caught in the moment. You're just like daydreaming. whatever it might be. I mean, the trails are perfect up there. Plenty of snow. They were flat. And it was like a split second where I think I was just kind of, looking around, not really paying attention. My right ski catches the edge of the trail, which has happened numerous times. You kind of hit it and you kind of steer yourself back on. But in this circumstance, it pulled me off to a point where, I mean, I was half my sled's on the trail, half of it's off. And I try to go to steer to get back on the trail instead of bailing. But during that time, the tree that I end up hitting catches between the right ski and then my front bumper on the sled. As a result, I remember everything in detail, which is crazy. But I hit the tree and it hits my shoulder, neck area here. We looked at my helmet afterwards and there were some scrapes on the side. So skimmed the side of my helmet, hit the tree here, and I launched. But right when I hit it, ultimately everything went black. I could hear ringing, and as you grow up, you hear the term, your bell gets rung, when you hit your head or whatever. And it was true right there, because all I can see or feel, I don't feel anything. It's just I see black, I hear ringing, and this goes on for a while. So, which is super scary because I'm not sure, what this is or what's happening. As I'm laying there, the ringing kind of goes away, and as it goes away, I kind of start hearing nature. The ringing goes completely away. I can see, but now I'm actually, face down in the snow. I'm on my stomach or on my chest with my helmet in the snow. Part of my goggle was actually, I could see out my right goggle. I could see, daylight coming through, but initially I couldn't move or feel anything. And then slowly I started getting some feeling back into me. I was able to move my left arm. You kind of get the adrenaline rush, you kind of feel warm all throughout from what I could feel. I started moving my left arm, but I had no idea where I was at. I felt like I was like intertwined in a tree or I don't know where I was at. It was just real. But all I know is, I can move my left hand. I feel anything on the right side of my body. And initially I couldn't move my legs or feel that either. As time started progressing, I kind of got some feeling back in my legs.
Wow.
But the accident had fractured four lumbar fractures. I'd actually broken 4 ribs, one of which had punctured my lung on my right side. So as I'm laying there too, it's very difficult breathing. It's so hard to explain. It was crazy. I didn't know what was going on. I was scared because there's, you don't really prepare for an incident like this. As a cop, we kind of go through that, the mental preparedness and, thinking of my family, just trying to get through it, calming myself to breathe, as I'm laying there and I'm just waiting to hear. Scott was leading. So I was just kind of waiting to see or hear him come back, at least so that I know he found me. But, I lay there and the only thing I wiggle my feet a little bit, my arm, as I'm laying there, I start to hear a snowmobile coming. I'm like, all right, this has got to be Scott coming back. But I can't move and I'm not trying to move myself because just where I'm at is really hard to comprehend. So I hear Scott roll up and then he comes up next to me, and I'll let him kind of go from there with that.
Well, before we do, Scott, I've got a couple of quick follow-up questions for Steve before we get into kind of when you step in there. But, I grew up riding sleds in central Minnesota, and, I've ridden a little bit in northern Wisconsin and the UP of Michigan, and I'll just share with you a little bit of my experience of, things that can go wrong when you're heading down the trails is, you hear very frequently that combination of things like, someone blows a corner or, just sometimes it's excessive speed. Times that someone comes around a corner from the opposite way and they're on your side of the trail. There's all of these inherent, hazards or risks to trail riding that's going on in the Midwest and the East Coast that's there. And like this situation you're in sounds no different. I'll just kind of, for anybody who hasn't done a lot of trail riding, I'll just vouch for the fact that your experience is not that different from probably hundreds of experiences I've had where, yeah, you're heading down the trail and your ski hooks the edge and you kind of get pulled off and you pull yourself back and you do your best self-control. But the other thing I'll just point out too, and it's something, I don't know if Steve, you've ever even considered this as a potential option, and I don't want to throw it out there that this is what happened, but I can tell you from personal experience what I've had happen to me before, which is there's times where you're getting ready to hit something and you get asphyxiated to an object, and because of the immediate danger you're in, you almost become like just mentally paralyzed. Like I ran into that issue as a pretty young kid where I was riding a three-wheeler around somebody's yard and I was heading towards the side of a house and I just kept staring at the side of the house and nothing happened with my body. I just kind of just glided right into the corner of the house. I clipped it. I flipped off and went flying. A lot of that for me, at least at that age, was just it didn't have muscle memory, didn't have, it's not your situation, but I'm just calling out the fact that sometimes that can happen. We can just kind of just get into this extreme situation that maybe we've never been in before, and we just get asphyxiated on that, or fixed on that object or subject, and you don't even know and at the speeds that we travel on these trails, it takes just a fraction of a second, and you go from like being like completely in control to being like paralyzed almost for a minute. Has that ever crossed your mind that maybe that's kind of something that happened along the way, or you just feel like it was just kind of sucked you over, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You just kind of get caught in the moment, and then before you know it, and that's a lot of questions I get too. It's like, well, how fast were you going?
Yeah,
there have been plenty of times we ride those trails, and Scott knows way better than I do, but we'd ride those trails all the time. And I'd be hauling down there. We ride hard, but this is one of those days when we do that trip, we're taking it easy. We're getting from point A to point B safely.
Yeah.
Type thing. So it could have happened the other time, and I probably, deserved it. But it was a time where it was just a freak accident. And it's like, I can't explain why it happened this time. And, it's crazy.
Well,
I was thinking only going like 40 miles an hour.
Yeah. The other things that can happen too with these kind of situations is you're in an area that's very familiar, and sometimes you let your guard down, right? And again, I'm not trying to sit and kind of tell what happened here. I'm just giving folks who are watching the show just different scenarios that can happen where this kind of stuff can happen. Is like sometimes just as simple as like the cold temperatures that you described. You said like that morning you stopped because you were cold. That tells me it was probably below freezing. For a Midwest guy to say he's cold, it's probably below freezing, because those Midwest guys like me and you, like, we're crazy. We'll go out when it's 10, 20 below, no big deal, right? But if you were cold that morning, that means to me that if the groomer had gone through that night, the trails were cold, your carbides and your studs, if you had them in your track, were probably hooking up like crazy, and your machine was probably performing differently than it did just the day before on the same trail, because the snow conditions and the freeze levels make a big difference on the trail conditions and how the machines handle, and if they hook or catch, or if they get pulled off, it makes more sense that it would get cut off into a rut. So there's so many variables in this sport of snowmobiling. It's not like driving a car down the road where you're always on the asphalt, right? Like, and you can control and you kind of know how it's going to act. On asphalt, you either got snow, dry, or rain, right? And you kind of in your head can see visually what's going on and what's different. But in the snow, you're always seeing snow, so you just kind of in your head think it's the same way all the time. So anyway, just some different thought process on other people who find themselves in the same situation, on things to watch out for. So Scott, we'll turn it over to you now. And, you obviously, let's start from the moment where you're just cruising down the trail thinking everything's fine, and then you look over your shoulder and Steve's gone. Like, let's just kind of get to that moment in the day, and then you take it over from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Steve's actually a really good rider. Him and I, when we ride at one of those things, those trails, we're neck and neck. We're, just going along. He's always right on my tail. Never have to worry about it. And for anybody that trail rides, the bigger the group, the more you get, the front guy's got to wait. And, I do a lot of leading with all my friends up there, and nice to ride with just two guys. Well, this just so happens that I get to this road. I look behind me. Steve's not there. Well, I knew something happened. I knew he just changed mittens. It wasn't going to be another mitten change, because he would have waited to a road and then signaled me to say, stop for a second. For whatever reason, I turned right around and I went back.
Yeah.
From the road that I went back to him on, it was probably 3/4 of a mile before I came upon the accident. And, immediately I saw what happened. I knew what happened. Everything was going through my mind at 100 miles an hour. The sled and him were completely 180 and facing back down the trail. And I could see the front of the sled was just gone.
Yeah.
Steve was laying face down. I think I jumped off my snowmobile and I was running before the snowmobile came to a stop. And so many things are going through your mind, but the nicest thing is as soon as I got to him, he responded.
Nice.
Okay. And take a deep breath. And the fortunate thing in this whole thing is both him and I had some training. Most people out on the trail, they don't have any training whatsoever. So I went into first aid and, kind of went through and did an initial observation to see how he was. And, besides the no feeling in his arm, I saw his toes were able to, or his feet were able to be moved.
Okay.
He was talking, breathing okay, knew where he was, knew what we were doing. Now the next thing is we needed to get help in there because I couldn't move him. I knew there was probably some serious injury, whether it be back or whatever it may be. So that's the next hurdle, is try to get cell phone service. Right where we're at, I tried calling 911. It went through, but that was the worst thing to happen because it went through and hung up right away. So the dispatch center got what's a 911 hang-up call. Well, with the cell phone, it actually bounced off of a tower south of a town called Three Lakes, Wisconsin.
Okay.
We were north by about 20 miles. So they started sending some rescue south. Well, because I didn't get through, I told Steve I got to go get service. One of the fortunate things in this area is I know the area. I knew where we were. I knew we were about 50 yards off of a road that we parallel as we go north along this trail. So I had to do the worst thing, is leave Steve. And unfortunately, he's right out in the middle of the trail. Fortunately, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Hopefully no one else is out there riding unless they're just like us. So I shoot out to the road and I shoot up a hill, actually to where that intersection where that road was where I stopped. Was able to get cell service, got a hold of the dispatch, and I told the dispatch center what road I was on. Fortunately, I knew it. And I told them I would leave my snowmobile on the road, walk in directly where my snowmobile was. So I left a marker for first responders to come in.
Yeah.
So that was fortunate in that area. And then I went back to Steve and I actually did, a secondary assessment where I was actually able to talk to him and, try to keep him calm. And I don't know if I ever shared this with Steve or not, but there was a point there where I was really starting to worry because as I started talking to him, he was having a difficult time breathing. I knew his lungs were filling up, and I was panicking. And hopefully it was inside and Steve didn't know it, but I was worried. I mean, we were out there for probably 45 minutes before and the first person to respond was the fire chief, who I know.
Yeah.
And he came in and he, basically he saw me. I told him what was going on, and he didn't have to do any type of assessment. So he just got his guys where they needed to go, the access they needed to get the equipment in, and then it was all on them from there.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, the whole thing from kind of start to finish is just one of those surreal moments where, all of us who do anything in life, whether it be a car accident or anything, we hope we never get into the situation where we're looking one of our friends or loved ones in the eye that, they're hanging on for dear life. And, Scott, for you to be there for Steve was amazing. So, if, you're a hero, you're an angel for being there for him, right? I know all of us would do the same thing, but the reality is, you were there for him and you took care of what he needed in that moment with the tools you had available, right? So,
yep.
No, and it was hard laying there too, because not only is it getting worse, but for a period of time he wasn't there, so it's really quiet.
Yeah.
And as I'm having even more difficulty breathing, I'm freaking out, but I'm still trying to maintain at least some positives, stay positive, keep focusing, keep breathing. But, it felt like eternity before he even got back. And then from there to get, when they got down, it felt like it was forever, way more than 45 minutes. But.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like you probably weren't literally looking at a watch, I wouldn't imagine,
Right.
but maybe you were. But to lay in the snow on a snowmobile trail where it's quiet for 45 minutes, and it sounds like nobody else rode by on the trail that morning, right? Because it was, yep. And so you were out there by yourself, and there's all kinds of things that cross your mind, and it's like, well, what if I don't make it? I think was probably a real concern you had there. And, I think that's worth talking about for a minute is, what were the things, Steve, as you laid there for 45 minutes that were going through your mind when it came to things like your family and your friends and your job and, all those kind of things? I mean, what kind of emotions were going through your mind and your heart at that time?
It's so hard to think about. I was thinking of my wife, Melanie, my daughter. It's one of those things where I'm in the middle of nowhere right now, and the first step is to get out of here. But I don't know, my body, when you can't feel a significant portion of it, it starts freaking me out a little bit. But I start thinking of, more than just my immediate family, extended family, friends, my job. It's just everything's going through your head. You have a lot of time laying there as I'm waiting, and it's thinking of those things that I enjoy. Keeping a positive attitude is the best thing to do. There's times I could have just easily said I give up, type thing, and I don't know what got me, but it's one of those things. Nope, just keep thinking some positive stuff. And it's so hard to kind of think. But I the biggest thing was I don't want, and I felt bad even for Scott, because I'm thinking now he's going to have to notify my family, or my family's going to have to get notified, and I'm thinking of how they're going to react or what they're going to think when they get this phone call that I can't make. It was hard. It wasn't easy at all.
Well, and you guys are in a really, really unique situation where typically you guys are on the other end of the spectrum, right? Like, you guys are the ones responding to these kinds of emergencies, and you guys are walking in and being kind of the ones coming in and saving people, helping people, giving them first aid, first response, CPR sometimes. And, to some degree, being let's just say it, you're professionally trained to deal with this stuff. And as soon as you're on the other end of the spectrum, it just changes everything, doesn't it?
Right. It does. You start to remember a lot of the stuff you get prepared for, your breathing techniques.
Oh, that's good.
And I'm thinking of those breathing techniques when I'm there, because it's hard to breathe. Initially, when I was talking to Scott, it's even hard to talk because it's taking more air from your lungs, and it's just like, it's tough talking. So I'm just trying to breathe, it was, but yes, having that training, I think, helped quite a bit. Perfect. And I know when Scott was there, Scott was talking to me. So when he's talking and there's some dialogue, it's keeping your mind off of some other things. Which helped significantly too when you got back. So
okay.
Well, and that was my big part of it too when I got there. It's just, you kind of go into that mode, because yes, we have done a lot. And not to downplay Rick or Jason, but they're usually there first. They just get all the credit for it.
That's about it. Yep.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
But sitting there, and that was one of the things I wanted to do with Steve there, is talk to him and talk and talk. Actually, it was, some of the questions he was asking me, because he was still face down, was, what does my arm look like? Because he couldn't feel it, And, I basically told him that it was straight. It was just laying there. There's nothing, nothing out of place about it. Plus, again, he could move his feet. So I'm thinking that we're okay at this point till he started having breathing problems. But, I was getting him the joke on stuff. And I think, we talked about this earlier. One thing he said while he's laying there was, I should have wore a tech vest. As he's laying there. I still remember that. I'll never forget that comment.
Yep. Nope. Exactly. And, you guys knew with your training enough to not try to move Steve, right? Like, I think him being face down, most people in your situation would be inclined to want to roll their friend over, or, Steve, for you to try to roll over. But you kind of felt like, it sounds like there was enough damage there and the risk was too high to try and start moving you, right?
As long as he's breathing, there's no reason to move. If he was having difficulty breathing or stop breathing, then obviously you have no choice. You have to do something to get breathing again. But as long as he was breathing, basically just make sure that there was no snow packed in his helmet, things like that. And you're better off leaving so they can get.
And I think that's a key lesson for all of us who are watching tonight, is that I know my first impulse would be to try to roll my friend over and get them to their face up and not staring in the snow. I don't know that I would have thought of that, right? And I think we hear that all the time of like, hey, don't move a victim if you think there's risk to a spinal injury or something. But sometimes, even though that stuff, common sense, or your instincts, I'll say not common sense, but your instincts are to get them in a more comfortable position to some degree. So,
right.
So great advice. And so
I couldn't even move my body that much, because some things when you try to get up or you're like shake it off type thing, but because of the way everything felt, I couldn't even move myself to do so. Which,
wow, that's crazy.
I'm like, yeah, I'm not moving. I'll wait.
Well, of course, I could actually see the impact that the snowmobile took.
Yeah.
Saw the marks on his helmet. I knew he had a pretty serious impact. So, my first thought was not to do that. And going back, and I know we talked about him saying that I have to make the call. It's funny because doing everything, getting him onto the ambulance and getting him out of there, and I knew he was going to get flighted. That was probably the longest ride I had to do on my own, was ride my snowmobile back to my cabin. Yeah. And the worst call I made was to Melanie. And that's when I broke down. I mean, I was fine the whole time, taking care of Steve. Steve was fine, but that call to Melanie really that hit home. Her and I were sitting there both crying on the phone.
Yeah, for everybody's benefit, tell us who Melanie is. I think you guys know Melanie, but nobody else does. So.
That's Steve's wife.
All right.
Yes.
I assumed as such, but let's make sure we clarify for everybody. Yep. So just to be clear, it wasn't his girlfriend. No, just kidding. Just kidding. So Steve, let's talk about that ride out, right? And so first responders show up, or maybe Scott, maybe you tell us when they folks showed up to help. Like, did you help escort them into the trail, or did they just see your snowmobile and then hike in, or what happened there?
So the fire chief actually came in and met up with me.
Okay.
And he actually asked how far the next road was up, and I said that's probably the best access. So he actually got on the radio, and the fire trucks went past to that road where they unloaded a side-by-side that's got tracks on it.
Perfect.
With a stretcher on the back, and they came down the trail, and then they took over. I think another crew actually walked in as they were getting that unloaded, and they started doing C-spine and getting them all packaged up, getting them on the backboard. Then their ATV got there. They put them on the ATV, and they went up the trail. And to be honest with you, that's the last I saw of it.
Yeah.
After that, then they took care of it. They did the ambulance ride to where they met up with the airlift, and then they got him out of there.
Yeah.
And that's when I stayed back. I actually helped the DNR agent get the snowmobile off the trail, and then I rode back.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, what did you that day recover the sled and haul it and tow it back, or did you have to come back the following day or two later, or what?
So I got back to my cabin after I made all the calls I needed to make, and everybody was en route up to Wausau to where he was going.
Okay.
I contacted some friends in Three Lakes, and we went up and threw the snowmobile on the trailer, and then my friend actually drove me down to Wausau because I was at that point in no mood to drive myself. So
yeah.
Again, knowing the area, having some friends up there, that huge help.
Yeah,
Right.
awesome. So Steve, back to you then. And so, from your point of view, as soon as you're being kind of bundled up and put on the stretcher and heading out, tell us about the rest of your journey as you traveled to and got into the hospital and started finding out how serious your injuries were. Like, just talk us through the rest of the story now.
Right. So, and I remember Scott and the chief had gotten there first because they were talking to me for a little bit before they actually got out to me with the equipment. The one thing I do remember is, I remember they come out, they got the board that they're going to put me on and turn me over. They get the C-collar on, and as funny as it sounds like, I know once they flipped me on that board, I had a sharp pain going down, my back, which I'm like, okay, good, I can feel it,
Yeah.
Even though it was pretty quick. There was some tingling and there was some sensation there. So I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't going to be as bad as I think. I'm hopeful. But they get me on that stretcher, whatever equipment they get me on, the four-wheeler or whatever it was. That was the bumpiest, most painful ride. They're going down the trail and it just feels like, I'm just getting wrenched in my back. But like I said, going off what I just said, it's like, okay, there's feeling there. I'm feeling it. Pain is good because you're alive.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was rough. So they get me down to the trail where the ambulance is waiting for me. I get in the back of the ambulance. One of the funny things is, they start cutting off all your clothes, to get access to your body, essentially. I remember they started cutting my brand new Climb boots.
What? Ah!
And the BOA, tensioners on there, so they start cutting. I'm like, no, not my new boots. I remember.
That's a typical snowmobile reaction right there. Snowmobilers, we're all the same. It's like, I just spent $400 on those damn boots.
Right. Like, pull the knob and pull them off. But by the time they did that, they ruined one of them, and I got it fixed later on. But it was pretty funny. Either way,
awesome.
So I'm still kind of being at least a little more upbeat about it. I'm not dreading too much. Obviously, I know it. I don't know. Actually, I don't know what's going on, but I know that they said they're going down. It was about maybe 25-minute ride in the ambulance. It could have been less or more. It just kind of felt like forever. But I know that Flight for Life was waiting for me. They get me to an intersection north of there. I get unloaded out of the ambulance. They put me in a helicopter. I'm like, cool helicopter ride. The entire thing, though, all I can see is up, and you're not able to turn your head or anything. But it was quite the experience. I get flighted from where they pick me up. They take me to Wausau Hospital, which is the closest one.
Okay.
I don't remember how long the trip was. They started giving me some good meds by then, a little bit, so at least to calm me down. I was kind of getting a little worked up too. I get to Wausau. I remember waiting there for a while. it's like anything. You go to the ER room, hospital, it just seems like you wait forever for all the diagnostics and stuff to happen. And we got there pretty early in the morning, and I spent all day Monday there, and I know family started arriving. Scott had made phone calls. My wife was up there, a couple of officers who brought her up. So, I mean, that was good. My family started showing up in the room. I still didn't really know exactly what was going on. I could move my feet a little bit. I could feel my right leg. My left leg, I kind of feel. I remember that, I could move it a little bit, but it just felt like, at least from my chest or pectoral on my right side, I couldn't feel any of that, or my arm. My arm was literally just hanging there. It was really uncomfortable. But they started doing all their tests. I actually spent the night there. The one neurosurgeon comes in, and I had the collar on for quite some time. She pulls it off, thinking that there was no cervical damage. Essentially, and initially, they had found my lumbar fractures. There was some swelling that was happening on my spinal cord. I had my scapular shoulder blade was fractured. I mean, everything on my right side was pretty beat up. I know that the family stayed there. I kind of went through the night. I remember waking up Tuesday morning. I don't remember how early it was, but when I woke up, I couldn't feel my left side at all.
Wow.
And
including your leg, including your legs, right? Yeah.
So I knew that it had progressively gotten worse. Or it turned out the swelling in my spine overnight, maybe from moving the C-collar. I don't know. I can't necessarily say that's what did it. Probably would have happened anyway, but that was really surreal because the feeling in my mobility was, it was very slim. I was freaking out at this point. I remember Scott, my family was in the room. One thing I remember is this neurosurgeon, she comes in and she basically tells us that, well, we can't treat you here. You're probably going to be paralyzed for the rest of your life. So we're going to have to get you to another hospital. At this point, I'm breaking down. I'm crying. I mean, my family is too. I'm freaking out because not only am I thinking about my family's upset, I'm upset. I don't know what's going to happen. Just the unknown.
Yeah.
At that point, we're just trying to figure out what hospitals to go to.
Yeah.
For me, going to Madison was probably the best option. That was about 45 minutes or an hour from Milwaukee. So I ended up having another helicopter ride from Wausau to Madison, where then I spent the following about 3.5, 4 weeks. At that time, they had put me in basically a shoulder or a neck brace all the way down to my hips or my torso that I had to wear for 13 weeks to keep me straight. I had no use of my arm. I was kind of in a sling, kind of hanging there. And I started doing some rehab and whatnot in Madison, but I was slowly kind of getting some use of my legs back. But for me, it was, as you say, I'm learning to walk all over again. There's days I remember I tried to stand up, pull me out of bed, and I couldn't put any weight on my legs. I couldn't feel it. I was like, I was pretty worried at that point because I couldn't stand. I'm like, something that you do every day. You roll out of bed, you stand up, you do what you got to do. I get out of bed with help from the nurses or family, and I can't stand. Why I can't put weight on my legs or stand freely, I have no idea. It was hard mentally. I try to be upbeat. I've always been pretty upbeat about this, but it's one of those things where I think the determination to get better. And they didn't tell me there that I could be paralyzed forever. I mean, they're like, well, this is something we have to work at. We'll see how fast you get some mobility back.
Yeah.
And I'm being hopeful that it'll be better than anything. So I think it was maybe like 5-6 days. After that, I started doing some more. They would help me up. I would stand. I was getting some feeling back, but I was learning to essentially use my legs again, which was pretty surreal. I had a walker. I guess fast forward. I'm in my spinal cord or my back brace, my neck brace. You're just uncomfortable with that, and then I'm trying to walk or stand. I think after about 4 weeks there, I could stand, and I was walking with a walker. We decided that I would move to Freighter Hospital. It was very hard I had a lot of people from work coming to show up, friends from even Minnesota coming down to Madison, seeing me, which was awesome. And having those people come and show up, it just shows you the support kind of kept me motivated. especially my family. Melanie was driving out, spending the nights in the room, back and forth. It was very taxing on her. But when I went back to Freighter, I could kind of stand, walk there. Freighter was essentially when I moved to that hospital, which is in Milwaukee. That's where I started more of my rehab to walk. You know, when you have an injury like this, before you can get released to go home, you have to do essential things like walk and bathe yourself and feed yourself. And essentially, I was learning to do a lot of that there. I think I was there for about another 4 weeks, and eventually got released walking with a cane. So there was, in 2 months, there was pretty good progression with my legs. You know, to this day, I still have Brown-Sequard syndrome, which essentially is everything on my left side, which is the opposite of my right side where my arm is amputated. I can't feel hot or cold. There's no sensation still there. It's rare. I'm hoping, you know, slowly it's been almost 6 years. I'm getting some tingling and sensation back a little bit here, but I could dump scorching hot water on it, and I would have no idea the temperature of it. Is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I go home. It was one of the things, I'm seeking different doctors. My arm is still limp. It's dead weight. You know, what am I going to do? What are the next steps? You know, Madison, I had reached out to Mayo Clinic. I'd sent all my different medical records, both places. Actually 3 different places, and they kind of gave me their prognosis of what may happen with my arm. Mayo Clinic was the most, I guess, proactive, or they had the best options for me. They said, listen, let's try to get you here. We'll do a surgery. The first surgery they did was actually to go in to my brachial plexus, which are, for people that don't know, your brachial plexus consists of 5 nerves from your cervical spine that go, and that's basically what operates your arm. Well, it was determined from CAT scans that all 5 of those nerves were ripped out of my cervical spine. So I had no sensation, no feeling, no movement because of that. They were hopeful that they would go in, maybe repair that, or somehow get some function back. And if that didn't work, the secondary, or the second option, was to try to give me some movement by moving 4 of my intercostal nerves. So underneath each rib is a nerve. It's called your intercostal nerve. It wraps around your spinal cord in your back. They moved 4 of those off my ribs, so I can't feel here. Those 4 nerves, they actually fed up into my arm, into my bicep area just above my elbow, or where my elbow was at the time. And they were hopeful that that would repair some of those nerve tissues, and using my intercostal nerves, I could maybe get some function. Hopefully it was elbow flexion, which, you know, bending of the elbow. They pretty much told me from day one that I probably wouldn't get any movement from my hand ever again. But the hope was maybe I could get some elbow bending, and then we could find other options later on for the hand.
Yeah.
That was like a 9-10 hour surgery. And when I woke up, I, basically found out that, they couldn't repair this. It was the worst case scenario. So they had to try to move those nerves. Fast forward, I had another surgery where, your humerus bone, which is your upper bone in your arm, is connected to your clavicle. That's essentially intertwined with, or connected with, nerves, tendons. When you have no nerve activity there, it atrophies. And I had subluxation. There's like 4 inches from my clavicle, from where my top of my arm should have been to where it was. So there was a surgery to repair that, and they put some screw in there with a bunch of sutures to keep that up in place. It was one of those things. During this time, I'm hopeful that something will happen, and because I didn't amputate for 4 years.
Yeah.
And during those 4 years, I was hopeful that, okay, what's the next surgery? What's the next option? Can we get anything from this? Or so I was hopeful. I didn't want to get rid of it right away. It was dead weight. I was in a sling every day. I went back to work, light duty initially, and then that's when I kind of started doing more of the IT work and technical stuff. But yeah, that was probably the hardest time. But essentially, I think for me, I was hopeful and positive about the entire thing. It's like, if I sit there, and don't get me wrong, I think everybody goes through some sort of depression at some time, whether it's money, whatever it might be. For me, there was some depression, like, I'm just not myself anymore. I can't be athletic like I was. I can't do the things I could do before. I have to do everything with my left arm. I'm not left-handed. I was right-handed. So the day-to-day things were difficult, but I had to learn how to do them because I had no other option.
Yeah.
So I try to stay motivated. 4 years goes by. During this time, I meet guys like Lefty, Joe Martinez, Amy Jenkins, other people through Freighter. There's a brachial plexus group online that you can kind of talk to other people with similar injuries, because this is very common. I found out with motorcycle riders, snowmobile riders, and it's like, oh, okay, there's other people out there that have gone through the same thing.
You're now my fourth friend that I know that and have had on the show that is in this situation. And so one of them, the guy that I told you about in our previous conversation, Matt Potratz, that I verbally introduced you to over the, just through our discussion, he's here watching tonight and cheering you guys on. So he says, thanks for sharing your story. So
yeah, so it was talking with these guys and trying to look how I can better my situation in my life. So I knew that, and I had a lot of, the doctors are saying that you're probably, because the nerve transfers failed. I mean, it didn't work. I tried aqua rehab in the water and everything like that. It just wasn't panning out. So after talking with them, I had nobody that really ever regretted, amputating. Limb Lab was a place, it's a prosthetics clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, where Mayo Clinic is. They were working with me while I was talking with everybody too, and they said, well, here's what we do if we can amputate here, which was, just above the elbow, about 2.5 inches. We can set you up with a prosthetic that'll kind of suction cup over the upper part of your arm. And then with some future technology, or even the technology we have now, we can give you some function. So it was pretty hopeful that having them explain to me that there's possibly I could get more function by amputating, and I could probably move on mentally and physically, I guess. Amputating, I decided to amputate, and this would have been about 1.5 years ago, January of 2019.
Okay.
I amputated my arm, and looking back at it now, I don't regret it whatsoever. I mean, it was one of those things where I think from that moment, maybe even after the healing process, but it was one of those things where you go in there, they cut off your arm, as crazy as it sounds. It was an hour surgery. I'm up. I think I left the hospital that night.
Wow.
I had no pain, well, because I can't feel it anyway. So it was one of those things where, well, I guess now I just left. There's no dead weight there. I can move on. I felt pretty good. And from that point on, I've actually been mentally more upbeat, active, and kind of getting back to my normal ways. Even though I only have one arm, I'm still trying to maintain and do everything that I could do before, or even more. So, and I think with my job and everything, I've kind of proved, and I'm showing that, you got determination. I can do things with one arm, even considering my circumstances. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's I'm just gonna jump in here because as you're telling this whole story, like the part you guys will be as surprised as I am about. We're already 52 minutes and a half into this show, right? It's like we're almost an hour in, which is awesome, like because it's such an amazing story. But as you've told that whole story, the one thing that kept jumping out in my head is like you guys completely and totally, both of you, but especially you, Steve, my shirt here, right? It's what it's all about. It's live large. What I tell everybody over and over again, what live large means is it's live life to the fullest, which you guys before the accident and to this day continue to just live life to the fullest, right? You don't slow down. You push, you push, you push, and sometimes we push past our limits, right? And then make the most of every day, right?
Yep.
That's an important one to me. Like it's one of the most important parts of this whole live large philosophy for me is to make the most of every day because Steve, as you've talked through this, you've had some pretty crappy days in your life.
Absolutely.
But you didn't give up, right? And you made the most of it in whatever situation you were in at any point along in your recovery. And especially at the point that you had to make that tough decision to amputate and you move forward. It's almost like you were able to kind of, quit looking backwards and start looking forwards in your life, right? There's a big piece of that.
Chapter and I moved on. So I mean, and it's from that point too. And even before, I didn't get into a lot of stuff just because of the arm, but I think once I amputated and moved on, it's like, well, I'm going to start doing this all over again. Let's get into snowmobiling again and riding UTVs and everything else. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So.
And the last part of what I tell everybody live large is all about and what this whole show and this everything's about is helping others, right? And you think of what we've done over this last hour here is you've shared this very personal story that frankly you have no obligation to share, right? Like it's kind of your story. You can go on with your life. People don't necessarily need to know this story, but you know as much as I do that other people out there listening to the story are going to hear it and be inspired by what you've had to go through in life because, for you, Steve, it was an arm, it was an accident, right? Other people, it could be a leg, it could be a physical, it could be a psychological injury. It could be something like, child abuse, or, a husband and wife, and maybe someone's being physically abused. Like, we all have these burdens in our life that want to drown us and bury us and push us down in life. And no different than you, we all have to look forward and have something to look forward to, right? And that whole live large philosophy we just walked everybody through, it works, right? And that's why we're here, and what we do every week is, I'll tell you, Steve, there's, most people would sit and look at me and go like, John, why the heck do you spend, hours every week doing this on a volunteer basis to tell these kind of stories? And I will tell you, it's because every single week I meet a new friend, just like you guys, both of you. You guys are now part of this Live Large family that I continue to grow week after week after week. And I'm just honored to be part of this journey that we're taking the snowmobile industry through. And I just know that it's more than just about snowmobiling. It's about life. And everything we just talked through tonight is a lot of life lessons, right?
And I think, even to go on to that, and that's exactly it. A support system from Scott and my friends and family that were there for me the entire time. That significantly helped as well. It's that support system that's needed for sure. Because there's down times, but it's one of those things where, I'm going to get through this and I'm going to keep on living.
Yep, exactly.
And I'll say it from my, my end of it, watching Steve go through this, and absolutely, knowing his wife so well and everything like that. And I know he had hard times. I know there was troubles, him trying to get back, him trying to get to some normalcy. But every day that he came to work, and which is another support system that we are fortunate to have. Everybody that we work with has been fantastic, from all the police officers to all the firefighters. And he can tell you a little story about an ambulance ride where they stopped and got fast food on the way back. But just a huge support. But Steve came to work every day with a smile and a laughter. And you would have not known he was going through any trouble. And that's huge, to see that on our end, on my end, it just meant so much.
Yeah. And, Steve, for someone, and this happens, I think, in society a lot also, is, someone that doesn't know you may see you from across the room, maybe sitting in a doctor's office appointment or something, and, see you with your arm missing, right? And, as somebody who's in that situation, what advice would you give the general public about that interaction with you in that public setting? Maybe it's a restaurant, maybe it's a thing. Like, generally, should people mind their own business, or generally are you open to discuss this, or is it different with every individual, right? I think it probably could be.
Right. I think it would be, for me, I have no problem talking about it. I'm really not shy. I think for most people, when they see me, when I was wearing a sling and my arm was kind of hanging there, I would get questions daily from people like, oh, what'd you do? A shoulder injury, whatever else. And they just don't know the extent of it.
Yeah, exactly.
When you amputate your arm, it's the opposite.
It's pretty obvious.
Nobody is like, hey, well, how'd you lose your arm? It doesn't come up like that.
Yeah, that's fair.
I talked about this with my family the other day. Is I actually get kids more so now. They come up to me, what happened to your arm? And the parents feel so embarrassed by it. Yeah. But it's like, no, it's fine. I get it. I look a little different, but there's no reason to not. I'm still human. I'm still going to do my thing, and I'm going to be upbeat about life, because life is what is what you make it, essentially.
Well, and, in all good fun here, we could make a joke about, hey, a lot of us look for a way to lose 20 pounds that quick. So,
right? I started my diet plan right before the amputation.
You should have been there the day we went snowmobiling again. One of the rental companies actually switched the throttle over to the left handlebar.
Yeah.
And it's inside their garage. Steve hasn't snowmobiled in 5 years. They look at all of us and go, who's going to ride it? Well, first, Joe Martinez goes, well, I'm out. Because it's the wrong
it's wrong arm.
And Steve goes, I haven't ridden in 4 years, so I got to ride the snowmobile. But that was the running joke between everybody standing in that shop that day.
Yeah, right. lightweight performance parts, Steve. That's what it's all about. So, so let's go real quickly through kind of, the what went right, what went wrong, what would you do differently? And that could be a whole nother half hour here. And I don't know that we need to take that amount of time, but if you could, each of you summarize just real quickly, like a top, maybe 1 or 2 items of what do you feel like was the biggest things of what went right? Like, how did we survive that day? How did it come out as good as it did? Like, what went right? And I'll start with you, Scott.
Well, I think what went right is my knowledge of the area, knowing where it was.
Yep.
My first responder training, being able to keep calm in a situation like that. Those are the things that went right by far.
Absolutely. And how about you, Steve, from your perspective, in your mind, as bad as the day was, what are the things that went right to make it go as well as it did?
Well, yeah, it's hard to think of what went right because of the circumstances, but you know what?
We'll get to what went wrong next. Don't worry. You'll have plenty of opportunities.
I think what went right was the fact that, I wasn't moved. I was being taught. Scott was there for me. Everybody was there for me.
Yep.
And I think I was trying to make light of the situation and making jokes and like my climb boots just so that I'm, ready for the situation. But it's so hard to think. I mean,
nope, awesome.
That tree went way wrong. So.
Yep, exactly. Well, let's go back to you, Steve, right away then and say what went wrong. Like in your opinion, think about it this way. Like not only what went wrong, but like what do you, we'll just kind of tie it right in with the next section here too. Is like, what would you have done differently? What went wrong / what would you have done differently, and what equipment did you wish you had that you didn't?
Right. Like I said, it was a freak accident, so it's one of those things that's hard to say. Like, but for me, I know that the summer, a couple of seasons actually went by where, Scott was wearing a tech vest and guys are wearing tech vests,
yep.
And I was just too cheap to buy one.
Yeah.
And, and tech vests and those stuff are made for these injuries.
Exactly so, right.
Had I had a tech vest on and spent the extra money for safety features, I don't know, it wouldn't have been any worse. It could have been much better turnout.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can honestly, like I said, it's not going to be any worse. And I could say based upon the impact, if that impact would have been lessened, having a tech vest, I could be here with my arm right now, maybe look less movement, but at least I have that option. So for me, I mean, I look back on that and I kind of beat myself up about it because you can always say morning quarterback what went wrong and what you should do right. Yeah. But now moving forward, it's one of those things like when I went out west, and Scott's been really great about that, like getting the equipment. I want to be prepared for everything. Plus my wife won't let me, unless I'm in bubble wrap, she doesn't want me going anywhere. So
if I wreck him again, I am not calling her. I told her I'm leaving the country.
All right. How about you, Scott? Anything you want to add to that of, what quote unquote went wrong or that you wish you guys would have done differently and or equipment that you wish you would have had that day?
Yeah, absolutely. The main thing I wish I would have had is if you don't know the area, which most of the time we don't, most of the time I don't know the area, except for what the planning I do ahead of time, a GPS SOS, that's key. I have one now, and I think it's the greatest thing. I will never go on a snowmobile ride without it. I don't care if you think you're going to be in cell phone coverage. That is the quickest way to get help to your location, and they will know exactly where you are. You don't have to leave a snowmobile on a road or do anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the few things, and then obviously a medical kit. I had some things. Fortunately, he didn't have any open wounds or anything like that, but a medical kit is a must.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he could have been knocked out, unconscious, needed CPR very easily. It could have been just slightly worse accident. And, if you had needed
or massive cut or bleed, bleed profusely or
compound fracture, like any of that stuff could have been very much a reality in that environment. So,
yep.
And so I'm just going to elaborate a little bit on the tool that you talked about, and you said GPS, SOS device, but there's a few of them on the market that I'll just highlight. And you have a Spot device is one brand, and they have I think it's called a Spot X that you can do two-way communication and messaging on to friends and family, and InReach is the original one that started that, right? So Spot was kind of the original one. You could hit just an SOS button and a couple of pre-programmed buttons. They've now evolved into a two-way communication device that you can actually message back and forth with. But InReach is actually the one that I've ended up using, and I just upgraded to the newest one recently. It's the InReach Explorer, where it's actually a Garmin GPS unit. It's made by Garmin now. It's a GPS unit. So there you could have seen that, yep, there's a road right next to me. I could have seen, if you didn't know the area. And then also when you hit the SOS button, just on both of those devices, that SOS message goes out. There is another third brand out there I know that is being promoted. I unfortunately don't remember the name of it, but any of these devices out there that allow you two-way communication in that environment of being in a remote area, view of this, the clear sky. And so, that whole scenario in that 45-minute window could have been completely different had you had an InReach with you, right? So you could have hit the SOS button, got emergency resources coming, and then in the meantime, Scott, you could have been messaging friends and family and let them know the situation right away, what's going on, and that helps on its way, right?
That's exactly. I got the InReach Mini, which kind of does the same thing. I can use my phone to do the messaging, or I can do some message on a small thing. But the nice thing is I wouldn't have had to leave them.
Exactly.
Again, as I talked about earlier, to leave him on the trail, to have to go get help because
Yeah.
there's no other option, that was tough.
Yeah, and I've heard, like, even I think back in April we had an episode where we talked about an avalanche incident, two guys riding together similar to you guys, and one guy got injured, broke his legs, and the same thing. The one person in the group to go get a cell phone signal literally had to drive miles down the road on their sled and then jump in their truck and drive another 20 miles away to get cell phone coverage. That's how far in the backcountry they were. And same deal, right? If they had that InReach or a Spot or a Mini, any of those devices with them, they could have just stayed there and comforted each other through that scenario. Because as tough as it was for you, Steve, you to lay there, it was just as tough for Scott to sit there and imagine you laying there, right?
Absolutely.
So crazy. Well, guys, I think we've pretty thoroughly told this story. We've got a lot of great folks watching the show tonight, and one last final run through of anything we missed, anything you guys want to talk about in regards to the day, the accident, the situation, the recovery, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with anybody that you want to say thank you to.
For me, one of the big highlights too, and I think what we just basically touched on, was I went back out west for the first time ever this February. And when Lefty had came out, or we met Lefty, he was our guide, and I got back on that snowmobile again, and we moved the controls to the left side, and it was a little uneasy at first on that sled because it's completely different. I don't have as much control, but when it was by the second day. I mean, granted, I'm super sore too because I'm doing all different body movements, but by the end of the week, I was hooked again. I'm ready to go and
that's
get
awesome.
back up west and do some riding for sure.
Yeah. So Steve, what percentage of your strength in your good arm and your legs do you feel like you have back from originally? 100%? Is it 50% strength, or like what would you call it?
Probably 80% or so.
Nice. That's actually pretty good for an injury like you went through, to even in your good arm still to have that kind of strength left over after an incident like that's pretty solid. So nice work. Then Scott, how about you? Any final thoughts or words you want to cover with everybody, or any thank yous you want to give, any shout outs to anybody?
Well, we kind of talked about the one shout out is to Jason and Rick with their company they're starting up with Altitude Sickness. This whole kind of meeting you was because of them. I've been riding with those guys out in the mountains now for a couple of years, and they came up with this idea for, getting these medical kits and making some more awareness for, being medically prepared for the unknown.
Yeah.
So shout out to those guys for getting me on the show here and getting our story out. So.
Absolutely. And it's an honor for me to get to know you guys too. It's always amazing to me, like how just perfect strangers can meet each other, and through something like snowmobiling, all of us come together, and we're best friends by the end of it, right? I love it. It's amazing. So, my just final thoughts are like, it's an amazing story that I know this message gets shared out across the way. Everybody who's still watching, if you haven't already, please share this out. Even a single share to your own personal page, even family and friends of yours that maybe, I guarantee you there's family and friends of you guys that are watching that aren't even snowmobilers. I would encourage even them to share this out, because there's somebody in their life that has been either curious about this story and what's going on through the family and the discussions, and now they can hear the whole story kind of from start to finish, as well as then I think we talked about a lot of just general life lessons tonight, and it's way beyond the reach of just snowmobiling. These kind of injuries can happen to anybody in any situation. It could be, heck, you could be walking on the road and get attacked by a dog or something and end up with some crazy injury that you lose a leg or an arm or something, right? But these kind of human interest stories are always super powerful and motivating for a lot of folks. So every share counts, gets the word out and the message about what we're doing over here, and getting it out. And so if anybody doesn't know, that's only watched this first time, is everything I do is just community service for the snowmobile community. Even the shirts and stuff that I make, all that money goes back to an avalanche education scholarship program that folks can. So if they want to kind of hear this Live Large message and get involved in it, there's ways you can order shirts. I'll let people know if they want to message me. But want to say thank you guys for coming on. I really appreciate it. And God bless everybody out there, and live large, of course. So have a great night, guys.
Thanks, John. Thanks for everything you do.
Yep,
Yes,
no problem.
you.
Thanks.